Welcome to FIC.A. Right now in this stage, please welcome to Timothy Caulfield, professor and author at University Alberta in Canada. He will talk about health misinformation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to this presentation at the very end of what I know was a fantastic day. I study misinformation, and it's been an incredibly difficult decade. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. And what I want to talk about today is health misinformation in the broadest sense. I'm giving a talk also on Sunday where I'm going to talk about health misinformation in the context of COVID. But today I want to talk about health misinformation, something that I've been studying for three decades, more broadly, because I think it is a fascinating time. It has really become science versus pop culture. And that's what I want to focus on today, is the role of pop culture in the spread of health misinformation, which I really think is one of the defining characteristics of our time. Even before the pandemic, I was noticing an increasing appreciation of the degree to which the spread of misinformation is doing tangible harm, doing real harm. And you started to see this called, misinfodemic. Now it's called the infodemic, and I love that term. But we started to see that recognition. We get data like this, and there was a study that came out just weeks ago that was even more damning, suggesting that, this is in the United States, I'm from Canada, by the way, but this is from the United States, where they found 4 in 10, I think it was 43% of people, believe that alternative medicine can cure or treat cancer, and there's no evidence to support that at all as one metric of it. Also, and as you know, it's more dramatic in Europe. But in the United States, about half of people in a very recent study, one that came out just weeks ago, I think put it at 47% of people believe there's a conspiracy theories surrounding GMOs, and about half of people think GMOs are bad for you, which is astounding when you think of what that research actually says. And yes, people are continuing to do incredibly crazy things like this. This is a recent trend where people are going into caves where there's radiation because they think it's good for them. Why? Because it's natural. They think it's natural and it's good to them. And people are actually doing this and getting sick. They're doing this, and we're actually studying this right now. This is an alternative medicine practitioner in Canada that is offering do-it-yourself fecal transplants. Do you guys know what that is? Poop transplants in order to cure autism. He's been sanctioned for it, continues to do it. This is becoming very, very popular. And of course, all of this, you guys probably know this already, is part of the multi-trillion dollar wellness industry. And in fact, the numbers are going up and up and up. And I'm fascinated by this because this is largely, again, trillion with a T, trillion with a T. This is largely an industry that is built on misinformation, on a lack of good scientific credibility. It's really, and this is often forgotten, about money, right? It really is about money. And it creates an incredibly chaotic information environment, really always trying to tell us how we're supposed to live a healthy lifestyle. And at the very end, I'm going to argue, and I wish my colleague was here that it was going to speak, because I know he would agree with me. It creates an incredibly chaotic information environment that distracts us from what I think are the 7 simple things that most people need to do to live a healthy lifestyle, and everything else is just noise. It's just noise. Okay, so I am going to talk about pop culture and the role of pop culture here, but I want to recognize that there are many drivers pushing people towards these unproven therapies, causing people to accept misinformation. There are many drivers. It's a very complex social phenomenon, including distrust of conventional healthcare. Maybe people have had a bad experience with conventional healthcare, with science-informed healthcare. Perhaps they feel neglected. There are legitimate drivers that push people towards these unproven therapies. So I don't want to neglect those, and maybe if we have time at the end for discussion, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But I really want to focus on largely pop culture. Now, I don't have a lot of time with you right today, and it's late, so don't worry. I'm just going to use a couple of examples. And I want to start with this one, because I think it's a really good example. The Olympics are just finished, and a lot of people, we saw these cupping marks on everyone. Has everyone heard of cupping? Is it popular in Portugal? Incredibly popular here. And I think it's become popular because of pop culture. Because of pop culture. And it really wasn't the Tokyo Olympics that did it. It was the Rio Olympics. And I always call the Rio Olympics the cupping Olympics because you saw people like Phelps with their cupping marks on. And it was absolutely everywhere. And you can see the trend of interest in the general public spiking after the Rio Olympics and then being maintained because you saw these pop culture figures doing cupping and spreading it. And of course, it wasn't just athletes. You've got Gwyneth Paltrow and her cupping marks, and then you have Jennifer Aniston and her cupping marks, and you got Justin Bieber. We'll do the Canadian Justins here. Here's Justin Bieber looking like a douche with his his cupping marks. And then you have the Prime Minister of Canada with his cupping marks. Can you see those? So is there any evidence, good clinical trials to support cupping? And of course the answer is no, there's not. In fact, most people, most researchers, most clinicians will tell you it doesn't work. And by the way, I've tried it. That's me. I was filming a documentary, and I got this done in Hong Kong at a Chinese medicine center. It was a very unusual experience, and to be honest with you, kind of a pleasant experience. I think there's a placebo theater that goes around. Have you heard that phrase before, placebo theater? A placebo theater that kind of surrounds getting this. Has anyone here tried it? Be honest. Okay, I've tried it. Just me. So I get it. I get why people are attracted to it. And the other thing, of course, with this therapy is the idea that it's been around for a long time. But just because something has been around for a long time, just because it's ancient and has a history, doesn't make it efficacious. And that's a point I'm going to come back to at the end. But here I just want to highlight the degree to which pop culture played an important role. And there are so many other examples, you guys, and when I give longer talks, I go through all of them, often picking on Gwyneth Paltrow. But this is my rapid fire round, so I'll just give you a whole bunch of examples and give you a sense of the role of pop culture in a lot of popular health trends. The idea of taking mega supplements, really popular now during the pandemic, but that's a topic for another talk. What pop culture icon pushes taking supplements? Many do, but who's my favorite example? Katy Perry. Do you guys know Katy Perry? But also Gwyneth Paltrow. 8 glasses of water a day. Have you heard that one? That is a myth that will not die. No evidence to support that at all. What pop culture person pushes that? Jennifer Aniston. She's always talking about Wi-Fi causes cancer. Have you heard that? Who pushes that? Gwyneth Paltrow. She's doing well. Here we go. You've got to detox your house. Have you heard this? The idea that you have to get an expert to come in to detox your house so you don't get cancer. Who pushes this? Simon Cowell. Do you guys know who Simon Cowell is in Portugal? I love that he's smoking, right? I mean, that's fantastic. But his house is detoxed. Bras cause cancer. Have you heard that one? Okay, who pushes that idea? Gwyneth Paltrow. Go Gwyneth. Okay, and then you've got homeopathy works. Is homeopathy popular in Portugal? And homeopathy makes my head explode because it is not even scientifically plausible, right? It's complete scientific nonsense, but very, very popular and becoming more popular in Canada, by the way. Who pushes that one? Dr. Oz. Do you guys know who Dr. Oz is? Yeah. Oh, my God. It's infuriating, right? Okay, and then you have cucumbers are dangerous. I'm talking about eating them, by the way. Do you know who does that? Gwyneth Paltrow, of course. Look at all that Gwyneth up there. Okay, and then you've got gem therapy or crystal therapy. I've also tried this. I tried this in New York City, and it was fabulously expensive, ridiculous crystal therapy. Who pushes this? Do you guys know this? Uma Thurman. Do you guys know who Uma Thurman is? But also Gwyneth Paltrow. Okay, and one last one. Exercise will kill you. Have you guys heard this? Who exercise will... Donald Trump. And by the way, you didn't hear this? This is big news. He really said it. He thinks humans are like batteries, and if you do too much, you kind of wear down. It's completely ridiculous. So I could go on and on and on. Pop culture plays this huge role. And how do they do it? Like, what? Of course, the celebrities have a megaphone, right? And they just have, and I'll come back to that in a moment, particularly in the context of social media. The other thing is that celebrities are an anecdote, a testimonial, right? And fascinating research tells us that human beings are hardwired to respond to anecdotes, to testimonials, and they are just well-known, often very attractive, not Donald Trump, very attractive anecdotes. And so that's another reason they're persuasive. But they also often push appeals to nature, this naturalistic fallacy. Have you guys heard about this? If it's natural, it's good for you, right? And Gwyneth, I'm picking on Gwyneth a lot, by the way. I wrote a book, actually, called Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything? That really is the title of the book, and she didn't sue me. But one of her favorite strategies is this appeal to nature. And here's a great quote. This is a real quote. I didn't make this up. We're human beings, and the sun is the sun. How can it be bad for you? I don't think anything that's natural can be bad for you, right? Oh, really, Gwyneth? Arsenic, uranium, lightning, infectious diseases, snake venom, lava, polio, hemlock, tar sands, malaria, poisonous mushrooms, shark bites, tornadoes, earthquakes, parasites, and people who eat with their mouth open. Those are all terrible things, all completely natural. And of course, you guys know this, the sun is also not good for you, except for the Portugal sun. It feels pretty good. But the Canadian sun, skin cancer will kill over 1,000 people in Canada alone. But this is a trend, this belief, even with something as obvious as the sun and cancer, people believe it. Look at this recent trend, and this was very, very popular right before the pandemic hit, and it's becoming more popular now. This is a real health trend. This is bum sunning. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah. Have you tried it? No. Okay. You said yes very quick. That's what I just. But it's a real thing. It's a real thing, and people believe that you'll sleep better and it'll boost your energy. Which is all crazy. Even Thanos, right? Has tried this, and even Thanos burned his bum. So yeah, completely ridiculous. But this, of course, is playing on the word natural, which is just an absurd strategy, but unfortunately a very, very powerful strategy, and one that we see deployed in pop culture all the time. In North America, this term, from a marketing perspective, has no real meaning. It has no meaning, and it shouldn't really, because what is natural? Like, what does that even mean? The FDA and in Canada also, Health Canada, are trying to give some kind of regulatory bounds to the word natural, but they haven't done it yet. But this word is incredibly powerful and has a health halo surrounding it. So this is one strategy that celebrities and pop culture uses to sell nonsense. Another one, and I think this is becoming one of the most common strategies, and it's going to be a topic of a future book for me, and this is fear-mongering, using fear to sell. In fact, a lot of those things I outlined before in my rapid-fire session were based on fear-mongering. Do you guys know who Jessica Alba is? Yeah. So, and she has a company called Honest. Have you heard of it? So it's a company that's really marketed mostly to parents, and it's based almost entirely on fear-mongering. This idea that the world is full of toxins and that all chemicals are bad, that people don't want to live in a world with chemicals. I don't know where they're going to live because the entire world is made of chemicals, but this company is built entirely on that, and it's been incredibly incredibly successful. And as you can see, just this summer, she had her first IPO. I think she's worth over $1 billion now, right, as a result of this. And it plays to what's called the negativity bias, one of the strongest cognitive biases. And this is the tendency for negative news, for bad stuff, as Julia Roberts tells us in Pretty Woman. You remember the bad stuff. And that is a hardwired cognitive bias. You know, it shapes how we see the world. And for example, there's research that shows that negative headlines outperform positive ones. And there's an interesting study on COVID news and found that, no surprise. But it is one way that misinformation is pushed. You have an anecdote that's about bad news, and it's going to get a lot of traction. This is an interesting study that came out in 2019 that found that this negativity bias is universal. This is actually, some of these researchers are from Canada. It's universal, and it really is, people may pay more attention to negative news, and this is used to sell bunk, to fearmonger, to sell product and ideas. We are evolutionarily hardwired to worry. And this has a whole bunch of consequences, and I can't go into all of them right now, but one of the things I'm fascinated with is the degree to which this causes people to worry about the wrong stuff, right? So this is one of the tangible harms that is caused by the spread of misinformation. So this was a really interesting study that came out in 2018, and it was basically asking people their knowledge about what causes cancer. And the researchers hypothesized, because of all the noise that we're talking about right now, people get it wrong. And their hypothesis was correct. People get it wrong. These are things that people believe will cause cancer. Stress, have you guys heard that? Stress causes cancer. No evidence to support that. Did you guys know that? Yeah. You guys are a very sophisticated audience, so you probably do. GMO foods, a lot of people believe that causes cancer. Artificial sweeteners, that's a big one. People think that causes cancer. No evidence to support that. Microwaves, cleaning products, no evidence. Now, I'm not saying all these products are good, but there's no evidence that they necessarily cause cancer. So they call them these mythical causes of cancer. But more importantly, what this does is it distracts people from the real stuff. Remember I was talking about those simple 7 things that we need to do? So the researchers found that people have poor knowledge about both the actual and the mythical causes of cancer. And this is important for a whole bunch of reasons, but these guys also found that being aware of the stuff that really matters translates into healthy behavior. So this really matters, right? This isn't just ranting against Gwyneth Paltrow. And they, of course, they say the good news is we can try to teach people what the good stuff is, and that might make a difference. Okay, so fear-mongering, naturalistic fallacy, fear-mongering, the power of celebrity, all those things push health misinformation. But of course, social media, a huge factor now. In fact, this is an area that at my institute, we do a lot of research. We're looking at it a lot in the context of COVID. I'll talk about that on Sunday. A lot of really interesting research, you guys, happening over the last year in this space. But I want to talk about a big picture here. And I love this quote from Sophia Rosenfeld. She's a philosopher, historian. And she says, social media, the internet, it really just is an algorithm to promote things that are popular. I know that's obvious, almost a circular statement, but I love this. It creates a culture of untruth. And I think that's a great quote. And there's lots of research to back that up. This study from 2018 has almost become a classic study in just a couple of years. And it's been replicated by a lot of laboratories around the world. But basically, they found that lies spread faster than the truth, right? Probably doesn't surprise anyone in the room. Have you guys seen this study? And it was a big study. It was a really big study. They looked at millions of bits of information. And they speculate that's because of the things that we're already talking about. It spreads faster because falsehoods, the untruth, can be more interesting. It can be more interesting than the truth. and which really speaks to how important good science communication is, right? How important things like this event are, right? To make science fun and exciting. But falsehoods, they travel faster, deeper, further than the truth. And that is really, really depressing. But let's talk about, we also shouldn't forget this reality. Celebrities own social media. They own social media. It is their domain. I have a lot of friends, and I'm very active on social media myself, and I have a lot of science friends and science communicators who are really active, and they're almost like mini celebrities, and they'll have like 100,000 followers and think they're a big deal, right? You put a bathing suit on and walk, and you'll be a celebrity and walk on the beach in Portugal, and how many followers do you get, right? How many followers? Everyone here knows Katy Perry. I brought her up already. How many followers on Twitter does she have? You guys know? Well, here she is holding up. This is a real tweet. I didn't make this up. She's holding up all the supplements she takes every day. She takes like 27 supplements a day, right? She's all about that supplement life. So how many followers does she have? You guys don't know? You guys are pretending like you don't know because you're probably all followers. 108 million followers. Right? That's how many followers Katy Perry has. And she's kind of peaked. She's not even a big star anymore. No offense, Katy. How many does the World Health Organization have? 9.9 million in the middle of a pandemic. Katy Perry's got 108 million, and they just added a bunch, over the last 2 years, right? I did that tonight. So, how about you guys? Do you guys know how many followers you have? Do you guys know? 195. Woohoo! Go team! No. But this is the battle we're fighting, right? This is the battle we're fighting. The reach that they have, and of course, one of the really important things, one of the reasons social media is so powerful is they play to our cognitive biases. I've already talked about the negativity bias, but they play to a lot of other biases. They play, though, most importantly, they play to the mother of all cognitive biases, and that is confirmation bias, right? The tendency for us to see information, facts, that play to our preconceived notions, right? The confirmation bias. And holy cow, has it ever played big over the past year and a half? It's been a very important psychological phenomenon over the past year and a half. But this is another really good example of what I mean by the confirmation bias. And I'm sure everyone here is already pretty aware of it. This was a neat study that came out in 2018. And it really highlights how the confirmation bias plays. If you believe in vaccines, right, you are going to look at and talk to and embrace and remember information that confirms that belief. More importantly, perhaps, if you don't believe in vaccines, you are going to talk to people who don't believe in vaccines and get your information from and remember it and process it. So that's the confirmation bias. And the tough thing is social media plays to this, right? It's sort of social media is a confirmation bias machine, unfortunately. So that's another big factor here. But cognitive biases, it's always important to remind everyone that cognitive biases impact all of us. So I'm going to use a non-health example here, okay? A non-health example. And this is from my most recent book. Do you think you can tell the difference between two wines? You know the answer already. And the answer is no, you can't. This is the most expensive wine in the world, by the way, right there. You couldn't, there's a pretty big body of evidence on this too, by the way. It's not like one study. There's actually some really robust research on this. And it tells us that people can't tell the difference between this wine and another wine. There's one study, and you may have heard of this because it's quite a famous study. They found that even experts, if you blind them, can't tell the difference between red and white wine. Isn't that unbelievable, right? And why am I raising this? Because it really highlights how things shape our world, how we view the world. The label, the price we pay, the music that is playing while you're drinking the wine, your memories of the wine and the ambiance in total, right? And that impacts all of us. Now, when I give this example, people always go, well, yeah, Tim, I can't tell the difference between two expensive wines, but I can tell the difference between an expensive wine and a cheap wine. Have you heard that before? Right? You know, everyone always tells me, yeah, there's a floor. You know, you get below $20 a bottle, it's crap. No, not really. There was look at this number, 53%. So this was a study that was done, I believe it was in Edinburgh. It was quite a big study. It was about 600 people, and that was the only thing they were testing for. It was very straightforward. They had a really expensive wine and a cheap wine, and they asked people to pick, if they could tell the difference. Pick the expensive wine, 53%. So that's basically a flip of a coin. I mean, this is good news, though, right? I mean, you just buy the wine you like and drink. If it comes in a box and put it in your fridge and you like it, go for it. People always say, oh, you're picking on wine because, you know, I love beer and I love good coffee. They have done studies on coffee and the same thing. Like, I'm the guy who pays for, you know, $16 for the fancy coffee, you know, for this fancy espresso. And they've done studies, people can't tell the difference there either. But look at this study. This study's fascinating. Basically they found that people can't tell the difference between expensive pate and dog food. So remember that the next time you're feeding your dog. But the reason I'm raising all of this is that just to highlight that we all have cognitive biases that shape how we see the world, and context matters. Okay, so how do we cut through all this noise? What can we do? Well, you know this already. You've probably heard it numerous times at this event already. This event, what's happening here, is part of the answer. This event is part of the answer. But we need to teach critical thinking. We need to teach people about science, right? And this is really good news because research tells us this works, right? There's been a lot of really interesting studies that show that you can teach critical thinking and it can make a difference. I really like this study. Came out not that long ago. It was done in Uganda to 11-year-olds, and they basically taught them critical thinking skills around health, which is really the topic today, right? And what did they teach them? They taught them how to spot bullshit, excuse my language, health claims. This is the simple things they taught them, and these kids were able to apply all of these things in a critical manner, and they remembered it. Just because a treatment is popular or old, like cupping, right, doesn't mean it's beneficial or safe. Just because something is new and fancy doesn't mean it's going to be better than something that already exists. All treatments, everything comes with risks and benefits. There's no magical, all-natural, bum-sunning cure, right? You always have to be aware of conflicts of interest. Number 5, so important, and I touched on this already, right? Personal belief, anecdotes, testimonials. That is not good evidence, right? You need a body of evidence, which is really number 6, right? These controlled trials. The other thing that I really like to emphasize, and this goes back to what I said at the very beginning about how all of this noise is out there, right? All of this noise about health, it's really trying to tell us how to live a healthy lifestyle. And, you know, my big takeaway is always just, you know, relax, because we should really just focus on the basics, right? Just really focus on the basics, those simple things. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't individuals that obviously need clinical care or need more personalized approaches, but when you're talking about this massive wellness industry, right, we can largely ignore it, right? We want to focus on some really basic things. Number 1, don't smoke. I can't emphasize, you guys know this already, but if you smoke, nothing else matters, right? No detox or supplements or cupping is going to make you healthier if you smoke. I raised this one. I did a show on CBC on gluten-free. Was the gluten-free fad here? Yeah, it was like a huge fad. And I left the studio, and this woman assaulted me on the street because she was so mad that I was saying, gluten-free is no evidence to support the trend, etc. she was smoking, right? So if you're smoking, you shouldn't be worried about your gluten, right? But this is a very common common disconnect that we see in the general public. Oh, okay. So I went on smoke. You guys knew this already. Don't smoke. You exercise and just move, right? Just move. You eat real food. You try to maintain a healthy weight. This is a tough one because, and we all come in different shapes and sizes, and we can all be healthy in those different shapes and sizes. I think that's a really important message. Prevention, of course. So that's vaccines, seat belts, bike helmets. The basic stuff, wash your hands, the basic stuff. Having good relationships, living in a loving community. And I said there were 7, so what's the last one, number 7? Anyone want to guess? We're getting close to that time. Well, I am anyway. Sleep. Sleep. I think there's a growing body of evidence that tells us how important sleep is, right? And the evidence is getting more and more robust, more and more convincing. Those are the things that are needed. Everything else, almost everything else is noise, right? Everything else is noise, like genetic testing. We've done a lot of research on that. Gluten-free, supplements, on and on and on, right? Coffee enemas, don't do that. Focus on what's needed. Ignore the noise. Be aware of those cognitive biases, those social forces that are warping what we hear. And I'm going to end there. Hopefully you guys have some questions, some comments, but I'll end with my 2 favorite words. Go science. Okay. Thank you very, very much, you guys. Any questions, comments? I know it's late. You guys probably want to go have a smoke and have a beer. No? Yes, go ahead.
Hello. Oh, this is work. Thank you very much for your very interesting and enthusiastic talk.
Thank you.
I'm from science myself. I'm a professor at the University of Lisbon in the science faculty. And some of the things I agree with you. On the other hand, for example, what if the information that is supposedly the noise comes as the good information? I mean, what is misinformation? What is the good information?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And this is actually more the areas where we do research, and more some of our academic work. For example, I was going to have a slide in there on, I took it out because I knew it was getting late, so I'm glad you asked this question, on what I call science exploitation. So taking real science, stem cell research, microbiome research, genetic research, and twisting it to sell nonsense. I think it's really important to recognize that noise, misinformation, can come from a lot of different sources, and including the scientific community. In part because you work you're an academic, I'm an academic. We're under a lot of pressure, right, to make exciting research, and that hype can be twisted by pop culture to sell products that don't work. And this is actually an area where we've done a lot of what I think is interesting research. The other thing is, and this when it comes back to critical thinking, which I think goes more to your specific question, is as science becomes more complicated and as science is used and abused in pop culture more, having critical thinking skills to be able to tease out what's good science and what's bad science and what is persuasive science is more important. And this is another slide that I took out. People need to recognize that you have to turn to that body of evidence, right? That you have to turn to the scientific consensus. It's almost never one study. So when they see something in the news, it might be real science. It might be exciting science, but it may not be enough science to change your health behavior. So if it's an observational study, if it's an animal study, if it's just one small study, that's not going to be enough to inform something as complex as health behavior. And that's why I wish my co-speaker was here because I know he would agree with this, why we should gravitate back to those basic behaviors that we know make a big difference on our health. And I'm going on too long, I apologize, but it was a really good question. A good example is coffee research. The research around, is coffee good for you or bad for you? And I use that example a lot because I love coffee so much. But a lot of that research, you probably know this, is observational in nature. It's real research, it's interesting research, but it's observational. And that's all it is. It doesn't really tease out causation. And we know from research that a lot of observational, correlational research is what dominates the pop culture discourse. So the short answer is we have to teach critical thinking skills to give people the tools to look to get a sense of when even good science is relevant. Sorry, that was too long to a really good question.
For example, you mentioned, as many people do nowadays, that through social media, that's how you get more to the misinformation. What if the good information is there also in the social media, and the one that comes, for example, from mass media is not as good as the one that you find in the social media? Because social media is like just a means to access information. Yeah. It's not like the source of the information is a means to make it available. You can find very good scientific work published on Facebook or Twitter or some other social media platforms. And then you're told by the mass media that whatever comes from social media is misinformation, which is quite, as you mentioned, cognitive bias.
Yeah. So another excellent question, and one I love because this is the research that we've been doing over the past year. So there is research that's mapped out. If we talk about COVID misinformation, and we've looked at this ourselves, what is on social media is not entirely, but there is a lot of misinformation. In fact, in the context of COVID, and I'll say this on Sunday, it's largely a social media phenomenon, the spreading of misinformation. Now, what we're trying to do, in fact, we've started our own initiative called #ScienceUpFirst, we need to get on social media. People like you and me, we need to get on social media and counter the misinformation that exists. So I'm very active on Twitter, and I'm active on Instagram, and So absolutely, we've done a lot of research on how the conventional press, we'll call it that, right? How the misinformation that is present is also present in the conventional press. Absolutely. In fact, I've done more research on the misinformation in the conventional press than I have on social media. But with COVID, it really has been more social media. Yes. Yeah. I'll repeat what you said. Yeah, the conflict of interest thing is they permeate everything. Even no matter who the information is coming from, you just have to be aware of that and then weigh it when you're weighing the validity of the evidence. It's a great point. Any other questions, comments?
Hello, hi. Thanks for the great presentation. So I guess, the social media is obviously like a big disinformation festival. And I was just wondering, you're mentioning, a way to sort of combat that problem is to get out there and do our job as scientists. But, I'm not convinced that's enough. So I was just wondering, is there any evidence research showing what other things work? How do we get out on that social media front and, combat that huge disinformation problem? What other means, what other ways, what can be done? What do we know that works, and that should work?
So I love this question, and it's sort of going to be the conclusion for my talk on Sunday, but I'm still going to say it now because I love it so much.
Thank you.
The good news is there's a growing body of evidence that debunking works. Like, it doesn't feel like it works because we all have these one-on-one interactions where it feels like no one ever changes their mind. But if you look at it across the internet, debunking does work. And there are strategies, and I have 9 points that evidence-based strategies that can be utilized to counter misinformation online. And our initiative, #ScienceUpFirst, we try to deploy all of those. So our social media initiative is an evidence-based initiative that does its best to use evidence-based strategies to counter misinformation on social media. So some of it's obvious. You use good science. I know that sounds obvious, but there have been clinical studies that show that using good science that refers to the scientific consensus matters. We have to be careful of what's called the deficit model. Have you heard of that? You know, just throwing facts at people doesn't change their minds. It's one part of the equation, but not the entire equation. Second thing, it's got to be shareable. It's got to be content that's going to look good on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. We're on TikTok too. It's got to look good on all those platforms. It's got to be relevant to those audiences. You also refer to the scientific consensus. I've said that a lot right now. By that I mean the body of evidence, the scientific consensus. There's been interesting studies with climate change, with GMOs, I believe with fluoride, and for sure with vaccines, that demonstrate if you talk about that body of evidence, you're more likely to be persuasive. And I really like that recommendation because it's an opportunity to talk about the scientific process, right? It's not one study, it's this ongoing, it's this body of evidence, it's always evolving. And if you refer to that, you're more likely to be persuasive. And then, of course, you want to be creative. I always say creativity wins. So we have to use narratives, we have to use humor, we have to use our own stories, our own personal sort of science stories. Those things matter, right? They really do matter, and that's what, and I think over the pandemic, we've definitely seen that evolution, I think, in science communication. And the other thing you need to do is point out the rhetorical tricks that are used to push misinformation. For the World Health Organization, their number one and number two is number one for them is highlight the good science and the rhetorical tricks. They put that in one. So by that I mean using an anecdote, misrepresenting risk, using a conspiracy theory. Good science and rhetorical tricks. And number two, don't waste your time on the hardcore deniers. Focus on the general public, right? Because those hardcore deniers, it's very difficult to change their minds. Focus on the general. Always think of the general public as your audience. And I agree. I think largely those are two good strategies. I have a whole bunch of advice, if you're interested, in a whole bunch of advice on how science community can get more involved on social media and ways to do it. And Science Up First, we also try to be very positive, upbeat. We don't troll people. Even in the anti-vax space, we try to be very positive, just always, and use diverse voices. I think that's so important. Voices from different communities. So I think that's also really important. I went on too long. I apologize, you guys. It's getting late. I know we're over time, but it was a great question, and I'm quite passionate about that. So thank you.
Maybe last question. So first of all, thanks for the show. And by the way, looking forward already for Sunday to know a little bit more about how your studies regarding the COVID. But today I would use the intervention we know that Facebook, Instagram, they are tailoring our profiles. They know almost everything, what we look, how much time we spend looking into the picture. And we know that our youth, they are being quite influenced by the social media. And I would take the opportunity to challenge you to share with us 2 or 3 tips that we could use to influence them, so that we can help them somehow.
To help the kids?
The kids and the youth, I would say, in general.
Yeah. So
Quick ones.
It's a hard one to end with. Buckle up, it's going to take an hour. No, I'm just kidding. It's a great question. I actually think, this doesn't sound like more of an overstatement, but I actually think this is going to be one of the policy challenges of our time. I said misinformation is one of the challenges of our time. I think dealing with the social media platforms from a policy perspective is going to be one of the great challenges. It really is, because we're asking private actors, these social media platforms are private companies, they're private actors, and we're trying to influence them. And they're international too, right? Ideally what you would want is an independent entity, an independent oversight that was accountable to citizens monitoring these companies. That's not going to happen. So I do think we are going to see some more regulation of the companies, and I think that's needed. We're already starting to see some movement in the United States on that front. So I think that's a good thing. And the social media platforms absolutely have to be part of the solution. But that wasn't really your question. The question was, what advice can we give our kids? So a whole bunch of advice. But let's end with this one, because it's a good segue to going out and having a drink. I think there's actual empirical evidence that tells us if we can just nudge. I have 4 kids, by the way, and so I'm very sensitive to this question. If we can just nudge, not just our kids, but ourselves, to step away, to be reflective. Really interesting research by Gordon Pennycook and David Rand from MIT. Gordon Pennycook's a Canadian. He's at the University of Regina. They've done this really interesting research that highlights that if you can get just people to pause, to be more reflective. And by that I just mean that in their studies they did stuff like read that headline and take a moment to think about its accuracy. They're less likely to believe the misinformation and more likely to think of it in a critical manner. And that's really a powerful tool because it's scalable, right? But more importantly, it's something we can remind ourselves, we can remind our family members, we can remind our communities. And I actually try to do that myself. And the other thing that I think there's a growing body of evidence to support, and this is the segue to the drink, by the way, is to step away from the noise, right? To step away from the noise, to put away, to have our kids and have ourselves, step away from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, in fact, from the news, and to take that cognitive break. So I try to put my phone to bed at 9 p.m. every day. I have a colleague who does research on this topic, and she actually has a little bed for her phone, and she puts it in, and she tucks it in, like she has a blanket. It's like this ritual she does so she doesn't go back for it. It's a great idea. I think those simple strategies can make a big difference. With kids, that last one, it can be tough. My youngest likes to go to bed with his phone, and he's not supposed to. He's in there. So it can be really tough. There was interesting research. Sorry, I'm going on too long. A study came out that says that in general, the first thing that people do when they wake up, 61% of people, is look at their phone. They don't kiss their partner. They don't pet their dog. The very first thing they do when they wake up is look at their phone. And if you're a millennial or younger, it's like 96%. 75% of us sit on the toilet and look at the phone first thing in the morning. And if you're millennial or younger, it's even higher. So yeah, this is going to be a real challenge. So let's all of us just pause, reflect on accuracy in science, and go get a drink. Thank you very, very much for this opportunity, you guys.
A Merck já ajudou mais de 4 milhões de bebés a nascerem, o que nos torna líderes em tratamentos de fertilidade e felicidade. Recentemente, contribuímos para o nascimento da Fertilidade, um concurso que premia quem representa a fertilidade através da arte. Por isso, podemos dizer que Merck é curioso